Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Steering the Conversation with today's hosts, Charlize and Felicitas. This podcast aims to be a channel to amplify the voices of young researchers, but this also means we're accountable for selecting our guests in a manner that reflects STEER's values of fostering exchange on equal terms. That's why we're specifically excited to welcome in our very first episode 3 young European researchers who work with Asia and share their insights on responsible research. Today's discussion asks a set of challenging but necessary questions on how Europeans conduct research in or on Asia and without speaking on behalf of the communities there. And what does responsible European engagement in Asia really look like? Whether you're interested in conducting research across borders and continents, or simply curious about how we can foster greater understanding between Europe and Asia, this episode is something for you.
We move beyond policy headlines and into the deeper ethical considerations that shape research, but which affect diplomacy and public discourse. In today's roundtable conversation, we will explore what responsible engagement truly looks like, not only in diplomacy and security, but in research, scholarship, and public discourse. To answer the question, how should Europe engage Asia with historical awareness, regional understanding, and humility? At STEER, we are committed not just to analyzing issues affecting Europe and Asia, but we also want to understand how knowledge itself is produced and shared between the two continents. When research about Asia is published in Europe, who is the audience and whose voices are amplified? How do we avoid speaking for Asian societies rather than engaging with them? And how can emerging researchers, diplomats, and policymakers ensure that Asian scholars and practitioners are active participants in shaping the conversation?
Thank you all so much for joining us today for this podcast. I am truly honored to welcome our guests, Federico Orio, Lorenzo Abisoni, and Elisa Fernandez Gallego, who will be helping us through these questions with nuance, humility, and intellectual honesty. The 3 of you are doing an amazing research and delivering educated insights into Asian history to European audiences, and we're so grateful to have you here, and thank you all for joining for what promises to be an important and reflective conversation.
To begin, I'd love to give each of our guests the space to briefly introduce their research and situate the lens through which they approach this. So for the first question, I'd love to begin with Elisa. For listeners who may be less familiar with East Asia, could you briefly situate the Dokdo-Takeshima dispute for us? Why do both South Korea and Japan claim sovereignty over these islands, and why might 2025 have been a particularly important year in this context?
Yeah, sure. So basically, as you might know, the Korean Peninsula used to be a former colony of the Imperial Japan. And so these Dokdo, or in Korean, or Takeshima in Japanese, are 2 little islets that were not mentioned on the treaties that follow the end of the Japanese colonial times. At the end of the World War II, when the United States and the Soviet Union divided the peninsula. And so this caused a dispute about the sovereignty of these islands. And so these disputes remain to this time. And it's mainly because it's not about the strategic or the practical value of the territory, but it's more about identity. And every time this kind of discourse appears on both countries' domestic politics, it's always very entangled with national identity. So it's a very sensitive topic because what's at stake is not the territory itself, but identity.
Thank you for your insights. If I may extend on that, what risks emerge when external actors comment on disputes so deeply rooted in historical memory and national identity?
So, yeah, the main issue is that when it's about identity, when you don't take into account this historical memory and this national identity, you can contribute to this ongoing dispute and turn it into a stalemate. So it's even more difficult to resolve, which is what happened with the case of Dokdo and Takeshima. And it could even be worse, and you could start wars over these kind of disputes or even genocide.
Thank you. What you've highlighted there is especially interesting in the weight of historical symbolism. It really reminds us that sovereignty disputes are never just about territory. They're about memory, dignity, and narrative. Thank you so much, Lisa. So the next question I'm going to turn to Federico Iorio. Turning to Southeast Asia, your work examines Cambodia and the legacy of Western involvement in the region. How did Cambodia's experience with French colonialism shape the reaction to later U.S. involvement during the Cold War?
Thank you. Cambodia, during the time of King Sihanouk reign, was desperately sought to remain neutral during the Cold War. This wasn't just a political whim. It was colonial memory from the French colonialism. And because after nearly 100 years under French colonialism, Cambodians had learned that external actors usually arrive with their own interest, not Cambodia's interest. So when the United States were pressing Phnom Penh, King Sihanouk recognized a common pattern, a familiar pattern. A great power using the language of protection against communism in this case to exercise control. So French colonialism had produced a Cambodian elite educated in Europe, but deeply ambivalent towards the West. So this is explained in some ways why King Sihanouk tolerated North Vietnamese on its border for nearly 20 years and didn't act about it. He preferred an uncomfortable neighbor to an ally that dictated the terms.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for the explanation. Building on that, what mistakes did the U.S. make in Cambodia, and how did those mistakes shape regional perceptions of Western powers more broadly? And perhaps more importantly for today's conversation, what lessons did Europe draw from those historical episodes?
So the fundamental mistake was treating Cambodia as a Cold War theater rather than a society with its own political logic. For example, the 1970 coup that overthrew Sihanouk was from American backing. The secret bombings under Nixon and all this destabilization opened the doors for the Khmer Rouge to assert power in the region. So all of these was framed in the anti-communist strategy, with little to no account to what it meant for Cambodians to be under a superpower like the US in those years. So the lesson for me, the lesson for Europe is very clear. When you enter Asia with a strategic agenda today, it means connectivity corridors, it means maritime security, it means technological advancements and competition. And you always have to ask who pays the price of the externalities of the strategy you're imposing. So Europe needs to learn to separate its intents and its interest from the narrative it uses to justify them.
Wow, Federico, that was amazing. This reminder that history is not abstract but lived and remembered is crucial to this discussion of responsible engagement. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So the next question goes to Lorenzo. So I'd love to bring you in from the security and institutional perspective. Much of today's discussion has centered on responsibility and historical awareness. So rather than asking how Asia interprets Europe, I'd like to turn the lens inward. If Europe continues developing its defense integration, what should the responsible European defense position look like in relation to Asia as a whole? In other words, what principles should guide Europe's security engagement beyond its immediate neighborhood so that its engagement in Asia reinforces sovereignty and partnership rather than hierarchy?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I have to say that when I wrote about European security expanding and harmonizing in my thesis some months ago, I have to say that the process was still very much at the early stages. And I have to say in the following crisis, we saw an incrementation of the harmonization and cooperation of the European industry around the defense system. And we must understand that European Union has always been an actor that had a very positive perception from the outside. So also from Asian partners, from African partners, the European Union as an actor, since it was only an economic giant and not a military one, has always been a positive in relations to inwards and outwards. We must begin to understand if an European turnaround on harmonization of the industry, also defense, would mean that Asian partners that always looked at the European Union positively maybe start to grow some distrust. And I think most of all about China, that is the giant economic actor in Asia, that always looked at the European Union with a positive eye, and was always in the first line to make new deals, trade deals, or to resolve disputes diplomatically. And so we must try to understand if a push forward in the European defense that is deemed necessary in the latest development because of near border issues would on the other side have the worsening of the trade relationships with other partners on other sides of the world. So that is a real challenge that must be understood.
Thank you. That is a great framework you laid out. To push that further, what would distinguish a European security presence from all the patterns of great power projection? And is it possible to design a defense or cooperation strategy that is strategically coherent but also historically conscious?
Yeah. It's a great question because when we talk about common European defense, then the next question is okay, in what concretely should it consist? In something related only on the European continent, or something that should project also outwards? And so an European presence, for example, in Asia would probably mean, as it was discussed also times and again, but was never implemented, not a physical continuous presence, so not like American style bases, military bases, so present and stationary, but they would be like was always proposed, a joint command, naval command, so an operation that builds consistently cooperation among European partners in another region of the world, and not here in Europe. It's totally different from the standpoint of also conceptual. It's totally different from the old way of imperializing a continent, so colonizing, going there physically and staying there to colonize and exploit resources. So I think it has a great opportunity to still manage to have positive relations with the partners in the region, without weakening a presence of Europe also outside its borders.
Thank you. What's becoming increasingly clear is that responsibility and engagement is not only about how others interpret power, but how that power is structured, justified, and exercised from the outset.
I'd like to now widen the discussion and pose questions to the whole group. After hearing all the research you've done, how can Europe balance strategic interests with respect for sovereignty? And perhaps, extending that further, how does Europe avoid repeating colonial or Cold War patterns, even unintentionally? The floor is yours.
So I will start. And I think that's definitely the million-dollar question. Clearly, looking at the current state of the international stage, it's clear that we did not find the answer. But I would like to underline the importance of having regional expertise within the teams, within the institutions. It looks like I'm doing self-promotion, but what I mean is that we need people that can analyze case by case, and not generalize. And most importantly, we need to listen to the people that is involved, and we cannot assume that something could be problematic from our own perspectives.
You're totally right, and I think that's a great perspective to have, and I think it's one that I believe our generation will adopt as we move forward, as we progress as researchers, but also kind of develop positions where we can actually make a change in the world. Does anyone else have any points to add on that?
Yeah, I think the case by case, the management case by case, it's really important also. So I agree on that, and I also think that Europe is allowed to have strategic interest in Asia, as every superpower do. The problem isn't having them; it's not admitting them clearly. So strategic honesty is the foundation of any lasting partnership. So what we are doing, I don't know, with Taiwan, what we have done with Cambodia in the past, what we have done with Japan, with Korea in the past, hasn't always been very clear to Asians. So I think that we really need to do that, and we must stop using the language of values as a strategic instrument. So when the democracy is invoked separately, credibility is usually lost. So I think that.
No, I think the last, especially the last bit that you said, Federico, it's especially important also for the conception that we have of some concepts, but that are completely different from the perspective of Asian countries. And I always say the example of China, but because it's the one that I studied the most. I'm sorry, I don't have very specific knowledge of other countries, but in Asia. But I know for sure that, for example, when we talk about democracy with China, we have a great problem of understanding each other on what we mean on democracy, because of course we mean our liberal style democratic concept of the state that they do not share. They don't think that is a state system that works for them, and that they have adopted another way of implementing policies, and they themselves call it democratic. So it's difficult to have a conversation about values when you talk strategically. I totally agree with Federico, and I think that the way around this is mutual understanding of the interests that are in the region for us, and also for the local powers. Because at the end, when we think about China again, we know that they are very strictly focused on being a regional power, and so they are not something that damages us directly in our continent. They are not in any way interested in managing something here in Europe. They want their interest there, and if they entangle with ours, it's there is the critical point of juncture when their interest entangles with in their territory. for example, with trade. So that's the main issue now that we have with them: free trade and transparency.
Those are really interesting perspectives, everyone, especially thank you, Lorenzo, for the last one. Our generation gives me a lot of hope in how international relations will be conducted in the future as we become diplomats, peacemakers, and policymakers. Now let's shift to the research aspect of international relations in Asia. How can we conduct research in or about Asia and present it in Europe without speaking on or behalf of the societies that we're researching? And when research is published in Europe about Asia, who is the intended audience and whose voices are being amplified in that process? The floor is yours.
So if I can start, if it's okay for you guys. So this is a really important question for me because when I work and I try to write some things, I usually always ask me that. So my starting point is that I can produce analysis because I have the methodological tools. I have archives where I can look in. I have critical distance. But if I'm not critically citing and engaging with and amplifying Asian voices, I'm producing knowledge that talks only to Europeans or Americans. So when I work on a piece, I always ask myself, who is the primary source of knowledge I am using? So if it's mainly European or American sources, I am possibly doing something wrong. I need to work with Asian sources and Asian writers and researchers. And the thing is, you cannot possibly eliminate your positionality. You can only make it explicit. Because I am European. I was brought in a certain way up. I studied in a certain university, and I look at things from a specific angle. So when I find disagreement in my theories or the thing I write on in Asian bibliography, it's not a problem to work on. It's data. It's something that I need to use to maybe prove it or say, okay, maybe it's not what I thought it was. So I need to, be more careful with what I'm doing.
I think those are all great points. I mean, you really can't move away from the bias that we implicitly have, and exactly what you were saying before with the honesty of our values and also the honesty with our own biases. I mean, I think that's exactly I'm not correct per se, but it's the right notion, I think. And I'm, like I said before, I'm really glad with that our generation is as aware as we are to continue our research responsibly, admitting our biases, admitting the truth in our values and things like that.
Yeah, I would like to add that for me, one thing that I've learned now that I'm working at the research center that focuses on Asia is that we shouldn't speak about Asia, but rather we should speak with Asia. And so this means that, of course, we have to detach a little bit from our research because we aim to be unbiased, and but at the same time we have to engage with the environment and with the countries and with the people that we are talking about, and we have to talk with them and we have to listen. Mostly the most important part is not to talk but to listen to them, and I think that's the way that we also prevent from doing the wrong things that we did in the past as well.
I definitely agree, Elisa. Those are all great points that you made. And it really is what you said about speaking with them, not to them, and listening to what they have to say. And I think those are all great points.
And if I may add on the speaking with them idea, I really think that, for example, something that struck me that I heard some time ago from a researcher that said that when he consults a research and he finds in the sources that he doesn't have any sources from the written by an author in the state that he is talking about. So, for example, when he talks about India and there is no Indian source, he cannot find attainable that research, even if we want to really push forward this unbiasing idea of being neutral and analyzing the facts and data without having biases. But I think that since it's impossible to not carry biases or to eliminate them at all, the best way is to incorporate. It sounds strange, but incorporate as many different biases as possible from a biased source, for example, from India or from Japan or from China itself. So incorporating all different biases and then taking something out of it without having heard only one voice or another. And that's a big problem talking about Asia, because I myself find myself in error because I don't know Chinese, and so I will never have a source written in Chinese that I can comprehend. So I know I have part of the problem myself, so to say, but that's something we need to beware when conducting research.
Definitely, Lorenzo, you're right. I mean, the fact that we don't speak all of the different languages in the world can definitely hinder us in a lot of ways. But I think what you're saying about taking as many biases as possible, really does kind of come around the idea so that we can kind of be as best informed of all the possible biases that we could be having or we could be facing to best talk with or talk about Asia. I think those are all really good points. I think that was great.
Yes, adding to this idea that we should speak with Asia rather than for Asia, I would like to ask all of you, as emerging researchers, how do you think you could engage with regional scholars and value their voices alongside yours when presenting research?
So, if I may start, I think it's crucial to make an exercise of deconstruction at the very beginning of your journey. In my case, because I did Korean studies, I remember that my very first assignment on my bachelor's was reading an extract of Edward Said's Orientalism. It's very famous, right? So I think that was such a smart movement from my professors, because at the very beginning you start decoupling yourself from what you have thought that it was the real and the truth for so long in your life. And I think that's very important, and no matter what your field is, I think it's crucial to read to non-mainstream and marginal authors and perspectives, because the margins and the silenced voices are always the ones who teach us the most things.
Thank you so much. Especially, I think this emphasis on marginalized voices is really important in research. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you.
If I may, I do think I completely agree with Elisa, but I also do think that this is a structural issue before an individual one. I think we can do a few concrete things. We can start by co-organizing panels rather than inviting as Asian colleagues as guests, as merely as guests. We can try to push journals, think tanks to start doing peer review from reviewers from the region of the study, which the study talks about. And I think we can also use the networks we have to advocate for European institution to fund research led by Asian partners also in Asia, not just merely participated in by them. So I think these are some concrete things we can do to make things a little better.
Thank you for these insights. Yeah, I think The structural addition is also really important, especially with most of the funding and research being in Europe. It's an important point that also should be considered. Thank you.
Maybe one last thing, because I already agree with everything that was said by Elisa and Federico. Really, I could understand it better. Maybe as just one last thing, also on the problem of working with local researchers and maybe having funds to do research in the region that we are talking about. We also have to bear in mind when we talk about Asia in particular, that there are some countries that are already prepared and ready to do research with us and are traditionally open to do so. That is, for example, India, Japan, and South Korea, that are the most prominent examples. They even want to write in English, for example, translate their work in English for us to be able to comprehend it and to have a voice. But many countries in Asia don't want to do that, or don't have the possibility to do so, because for historical reasons the researchers of their in their state prefer to do local research and domestic research rather than searching outside for to have a voice. So of course, when we must bear in mind that maybe we are already also taking, so it's that is the ultimate paradox, also being aware of taking local voices, also being aware of having sources written in the state that we are talking about. Then we also have the problem that they state that he's writing that source maybe has a bias in itself. So maybe when we talk, for example, of the problems in the South China Sea, Japanese and Indians are much more aligned with our point of view already. Other countries are not, and so to make research is important also to take the other point of view, and not always it's even available to be read.
Yes, thank you for those last points, and also for adding that, of course, when we're speaking about Asia, we also have to see the distinctions in the different countries and should not consider Asia as this one unit of discussion. Thank you all for your insights on that particular question.
Next, I wanted to ask, for those of us who are up-and-coming researchers, diplomats, and policymakers, how do we ensure that Asian scholars and policymakers are part of shaping the conversation and not simply just subjects to it? And from your experience as researchers, what does ethical field research in Asia look like for you today?
Maybe I start this time because the others took this responsibility the other times. But I think that most of all, it's the word that best describes it is respect. Respect, because it's something that in the Asian culture is very rooted, and they do in their research when talking about us, and we are not so accustomed to think about us at the same level of our interlocutor. We usually take this neutral moral stance in which we have the moral high ground in talking about research and stuff outside of our region, our home region, and so respect of local problems and solutions that are found also when are different from our point of understanding. I think that is the main point.
Great points that you made, Lorenzo. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think if I may, just a quick thing I wanted to say, that usually European researchers, and American researchers are taught to what we count as evidence, to understand what we count as evidence. So we trust written documents, archives, peer-reviewed academic sources. But usually, and well, most of the in Asian context, orally transmitted knowledge, community memory, informal institutional practices are primary sources for research. But my training pushes me to treat them as secondary. So this is a big thing I have to fight when talking about and researching about Asia. And so also, I think there is a big problem of what we study, because we tend to study crisis, conflicts, anomalies. We study issues, disputes between borders, but we rarely we tell stories of successful cooperation, resilience, or also ordinary things. So I think this in some way distorts the image of Asia in Europe in some way. So we need to, I think, work on that too.
That is an amazing point, Federico. I think that's also a big point, especially for STEER, because it's exactly what we try to achieve, talking about European and Asian cooperation rather than just highlighting the crisis moments. So I think that's a really important point. And also what you're saying about how, our training does kind of teach us to not highlight certain things and highlight maybe just more written concrete documents, which are obviously highlighting crisis, which STEER is on the way to highlighting their cooperation, which hopefully will happen a lot more in the future.
I would like to add something on that because, well, as I've mentioned before, I think reading the marginalized voices is so important. And when you think of international relations theory, for example, it's extremely westernized, is extremely everything that is mainstream, so like white and male and all of that, right? And so I think we need to start there, because that's when you read that, you see how knowledge per se it's very much biased, and it's very much oppressive, and it's very much not taking into account how knowledge could be perceived from other perspectives. And that's when it comes other regional, like, for example, what knowledge means in Asia or what knowledge means in other parts of the world. And so I think it's very important to start there. And also regarding what you've mentioned about future diplomats and future policymakers, I think we also need regional expertise there, because I'm aware that some of them are not receiving training. Like, for example, I had the pleasure to attend to a talk by a member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands that works related to Japan and South Korea. Like, basically, he is the advisor to, for example, when the prime minister has to go to South Korea or Japan, he would be the advisor, right? And I asked him if he received some kind of regional training or something like that, and he said, no, that's not a thing that they do in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I was really shocked. So I think that's also something that we should take into account and maybe be a little bit critical with the structural part of the things.
Definitely. I think you make great points, Elisa. I mean, we do need to kind of speak with voices that are coming from the ground up and have people who are already in established positions get expertise on the places that they're traveling to, on the people that they are going to be speaking with. I think that's an amazing point as well. I love the honesty and genuinely reflective nature that you guys have. Just to sum it up, I'd love to ask each of you something slightly more personal and future-oriented. What gives you hope, and what are you cautious about when it comes to research or possible careers in the future with Asia?
What gives me, if I may, what gives me hope is the humility I see in our generation when we approach these kind of issues. And also, it gives me hope how Asian scholars are seen as critical interlocutors and not disciples as to Europeans. And what I'm cautious about is the speed at which geopolitical competition between the US, China, and the EU risks turning the Asia theater into a landscape of forced choices, because many of the countries in the region do not want to choose a side, and they are right to not to. So Europe should be the kind of power that doesn't demand alignment, but I'm not sure if the systemic pressure from other superpowers allows for that. So that's what I'm cautious about.
That is such a great point. Anyone else?
So if I may add, I think where the hope is basically in thinking that maybe this turning point that we're living in, where the global powers are shifting, maybe this serves as a way for Europe to see that we shouldn't be in a competition against like economic or any other kind of competition with China mainly, but with Asia in general, and we should start to collaborate with them. We should partner with them instead of seeing them as adversary. So yeah.
Another great point, Elisa. Thank you so much for that.
And I have to say, I'm not usually. I'm usually a pessimist, so maybe I'm not. I'm not really in a great position here. But I have to say that the one thing that gives me hope is the fact that when European Union, usually European states, resolve internal disputes, they have proven to be open and searching for diplomatic action and searching for a collaborative way in their external relations. And so what gives me hope is eventually to have an European Union that is able to speak on the global stage, because I don't see it as a antagonistic and power-seeking giant, but more open to the dialogue and to diplomatic action rather than power struggles. I have to say I'm a bit pessimist in the sense that the recent development of the world are difficult to argue for being positive for being positive towards the future, but we can always hope.
We can always hope. You're so right, Lorenzo. I want to thank you guys all so much. As we bring this roundtable to a close with Federico, Lorenzo, and Elisa, what stands out is that the importance of valuing one another in scholarship, diplomacy, and strategic activities. We Europeans need to be aware of the power structures that underlie our world, and we should avoid to our best ability to reproduce them in our research. Moreover, it is about historical awareness and meaningful inclusion. It requires listening as much as speaking, partnership rather than projection, and collaboration over assumption. To our guests, thank you for your honesty, for your nuance, and for your willingness to engage with us completely.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this first episode of Steering the Conversation. In our next episode, we are going to be having a special conversation. Instead of sitting down with young researchers, we will be hosting 2 NGOs to learn about their societal impact and the work of young change makers in this field. We hope to see you there.
Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.